You are joining the San Joaquin Master Food Preservers presentation in November of 2021. And today we're going to talk about seasonal favorites. And the seasonal favorite that we're talking about is cranberries. I did a little research on cranberries and I knew that they were a high acid fruit. And I learned that they are very high acid. Their acid content is usually around 2.3 on the pH scale, which makes them as acid as lemons, which means that they are a thing that is really safe to preserve because they already come with a lot of acid in them, which is one of the things that makes things safe to preserve. So today, Colleen Young and Barbara Matthijs are my helpers, and they will be answering questions in the chat room. And the recipe that we're going to talk about today is cranberry chutney. And I think of it, our group, I am probably the person who likes chutney the most. And I think there are about as many different kinds of chutney as there are people who make chutney. And one of the features of chutney is it usually has a lot of ingredients. And the recipe that I think I counted them the other day, this recipe that we're going to talk about today has 15 ingredients. But don't let that daunt you. It's not that bad. And it's actually pretty easy to do. Now, all right. So you can see the picture of the cranberry chutney done.
Yes.
Yay. Okay. As you can see the reason why we want to make this. See how pretty it is? It's really pretty. It's pretty in the jar and it's pretty on the plate. And I can tell you that it is something that you will enjoy putting on your turkey sandwiches, your chicken sandwiches, your ham sandwiches, just about any sandwich. I have found that it makes a sandwich spread that I think I like better than mayonnaise. And anytime I can cut down the amount of mayonnaise I eat, that's probably a good thing. So it's a thing you want to do. All right. Okay. We always start off by talking about being clean in the kitchen and cutting down ways the food can be contaminated. And so we need to talk about this. There's produce, and in this recipe, you've got onions and you've got cranberries you have several things that are produce here. Anyway, it can be contaminated by bacteria in the soil and the water, animals, humans. Somebody sneezed on it in the store before you bought it, and kitchen surfaces, cutting boards, and knives. So what do? You wash before cutting. Wet each item with water, rub its surface, rinse with running water, and dry blot with a paper towel before you start cutting it up. Don't soak it. If you put it in a bowl of water, you just give more opportunity. And if you think about something like an orange, which you're going to use I think we're going to use an orange in this, and we need some zest. So that means we're going to be scraping off some of the peel. There's a lot of bumps in an orange. And if you make it easy for the bacteria to move around, there's lots of places for it to hide. So always wash your hands, your surfaces, your cutting boards, and your knives. And I've forgotten the formula. Barbara, what's the formula for the bleach spray that we can clean our sinks with and our cutting boards and stuff?
It's a 10% bleach formula. It's 1 part bleach and 9 parts water, and should be made in a timely manner as it loses its potency over 24 hours.
Right. And you can mix it up and you can mix it, have it in a squirt bottle and just squirt everything inside. Just don't squirt your clothes because it will take the color out. And you might not like that. Okay. This chutney that we're going to make is from the Ball Complete Book of Home Food Preservation, which is one of our approved sources for recipes. And you can use either fresh or frozen cranberries. And cranberries are one of the fruits that you can buy them in a bag and you can pop them in the freezer. You don't have to do anything to prep them to freeze them. And that means that if you have the freezer room, you can have cranberries all year. And since I can't imagine anybody wanting to eat cranberries fresh. Cranberries need to be cooked. And so since you're going to cook them anyway, they don't really, there's not a difference in the way they cook out or anything. Okay, the candied pineapple, I have found, I found a couple of places where I can get candied pineapples. Not always easy to find, but you can. And the raisins need to be golden raisins for this recipe. Now, this, especially when you have 16 or 15 ingredients, it's really important to read the recipe all the way through before you go shopping, because it's real pain to get started and to start adding all your ingredients and then find out you didn't have the ginger or whatever else. And now you have to stop and go out and get it. And that's not a fun thing to do. So make sure that you have that, and make sure you all the equipment that you need is ready to get to, so that you don't have to go spend some time digging for it. Okay, the recipe is in the chat, and it's available for you to use. And it, as you can see, it has a whole bunch of ingredients. The cayenne pepper is just a little bit, but it gives it a little tiny bit of a kick. And golden raisins can be had. They're different from the regular black raisins. And I suppose it could be made with the black raisins, but it looks prettier with the golden. And a tip that we found out with the ginger root, ginger root doesn't, well, sometimes you can find it all year long, but you can't always be assured of it. And one of the things you want to look for when you're buying ginger is you want to find the biggest, fattest roots you can find, because they are a pain to peel. And so the bigger pieces you have, the less pain you have when it comes to peeling them. And I bought a big bag last year and used a lot of it, but I still had quite a bit left, and I popped it in the freezer, and we used frozen, we let it thaw out, of course, frozen ginger root. And my partner in crime, Barbara, told me that it was actually easier to peel than usual. So let's see, the only other ingredient here that you might not have at home is dry mustard. Not everybody has dry mustard, so you might need to make sure you have that. But most of the rest of the stuff is stuff that you would have in a normal kitchen. Okay, took 2 pictures to get everything that goes into this recipe in the pictures. So we've got the ginger root, we've got the garlic, the dried pineapple, an orange, which you get the orange juice and the orange zest out of, the cranberries, onion, and then the pickling and canning salt. And you want to use pickling and canning salt for I'll pick all of these recipes because it doesn't have any added chemicals in it to keep it from clumping. And those added chemicals can leave a taste, and they can make it cloudy in your jar. So you want to use salt that is designed for pickling and canning. And we've got sugar, and we've got dry mustard down there, and cinnamon and cloves and red wine vinegar. So that's what it took to make this recipe. And the equipment. If you're somebody who cans a lot, you may already have or know somebody who has a steam canner, which is the canner that's on the left of your slide. And I actually prefer this for most of the things that I can these days, because it's lightweight, it's easy to carry around, and it does not require a ton of water. You fill it up to where the water is just below that little shelf that all the jars are sitting on, and that takes maybe a gallon or a gallon and a half, something like that. Whereas the water bath canner that's on the other side takes quite a bit more and is a lot heavier. Now, if you don't have a steam canner and you still want to make this recipe, you can make this recipe. The water bath canner over there, if you have one of those, and they're cheap, those are relatively inexpensive to buy. But if you don't have one of those, you can use any pan you have that is big enough for you to be able to put the jar in the pan and cover it with water. And you can take and put together some of the rings that go on the top of the jars and tie them together with a wire tie. And you can make a little stand, or you can use a little cake stand. If you have a little cake rack that you cool your cake on, you can put that in the bottom of the pan. I have the pan I used to use the most was a pasta pan that my daughter had given me, and it came with a liner. It came with a sieve in the pot, so I could set all the jars in there, and then I just had to lift it up and when I was done. In the middle slide, you can see a timer, and that timer is a 1-minute timer, but I have a timer on my phone, and I have another regular kitchen timer that I use. We have measuring cups, and the one that the blue thing is in, that is a liquid measure cup. And the blue thing is what we use to measure headspace. Each one of those little notches at the top is a 1/4 inch. And so when you put it on the side of the jar, where you can see how much space you have between the top of the stuff that you put in the jar and where the top of the jar is. And that heads, we call it headspace, that is specified in each recipe. And then the funny looking thing on the side, that is called a jar lifter, and it's very handy for moving hot jars out of hot water or out of a hot steam canner when you're done. And it's not essential, but it's really darn handy to have. Okay, it really helps if you have a stainless steel or an enamelware pan. You want something that is not going to react with the acid that's in the food. So you would not want to use cast iron, for instance, or aluminum, because both of those would react with the acid in the food that you're cooking. So a large stainless steel pan. This is actually it's a big frying pan, but it has about a 4-inch side on it. And I use it for a lot of things because it's just right for most batches of jam. It was just right for this size batch of cranberries. And so it makes it easy. And then I like to use it when I'm preparing one of these PowerPoints because it's easy to take a picture. Anyway, so you start off and you put all of these things in. You put the onions in, which you can see are chopped up small. The pineapple would be chopped up fairly small, because remember, that size chunk is not going to change. It's going to be identifiable when you're done. And one of the things that's interesting about the ginger root, again, is when you are cutting it up, you'll notice that it seems very fibrous. But one of the things that happens to ginger when you cook it is the fibers disappear. They change structure. And so you're not going to have crunchy, chewy pieces of ginger root, but you still want them small, because the smaller they are, the more flavor you'll get out of them. The orange zest, the juice, and vinegar. You put them in the pan, turn on the heat, and stir, and bring them to a boil. And then once they're at a boil, you want to reduce the heat, cover them, and boil gently until the cranberries soften. So that's probably about 15 minutes or so. And that will be enough where things get done. And that's what it looks like. Then at that point in time, you add the raisins and the vinegar and the mustard and the cinnamon and the cloves and the cayenne. And then you will cook it for another 15 minutes gently and slightly runny. So thinner than you would want it to be when you're finished, because it'll get thicker after it's cooked. Part of that's just from the cooling process. And then I think that there's a certain amount of pectin in the cranberries that will help with the thickening up. Because what you want is a consistency that you can spread on bread, and it doesn't run out the bottom and run down your chest as you're trying to eat your sandwich. Why? Oh, that's why. Okay. While you were cooking, then you will prepare the canner, the jars, and the lids. And so when you're done cooking, now you're ready to fill the jars. So you bring the jars over, you fill them, and that headspace we were talking about, you want a 1/2 inch of headspace for this recipe. And you need to check every recipe, because they're not all the same. Some recipes want a 1/4 inch, some want a 1/2 inch, some want an inch. And so you need to make sure you have the right amount of space. It's part of what makes it safe to be in the jar. And after you've gotten the jars filled and you've made sure you had the right amount of headspace, Now you want to take a wet paper towel and you want to clean off the top of the jar. You want to make sure any drips and drops of chutney that you got on the side are wiped away, because any of that left on the top of the jar will interfere with the seal that you want to get when you put it through the processing. So once you've done that, you put the lid on the top of the jar and you put the ring on and you tighten it until it's finger tight. And as I always say, that means Grandma Linda finger tight, not strong grandson Drew finger tight, because they're not the same thing. Oh, okay. All right. So you put them in the canner and you space them out. You want to make sure that there's room for the steam to move or the water to move around each jar. You don't want them, and you don't ever want anything sitting on the bottom. I mean, these are sitting on that little shelf. And if you were doing the water bath canner, it needs to either be on a rack, or the rack you made out of the rings stuck together, or a cake cooling rack, whatever it is. But you don't want it sitting on the bottom, because that would, one, it stops the water from circulating. And I think you probably end up with more broken jars that way. And that's a mess. So once you do it, now, depending on which method you're using, the end is slightly different. If you're doing it in a water bath canner, when you get to the end of the processing time, which for this recipe is 10 minutes, once you've done the 10 minutes of under a full boil, it's boiling away, then you turn off the fire and you turn off the fire, you take the lid off, and you let it sit for 5 minutes before you remove the jars from the canner. And the reason for that is everything in that canner has been violently moving around with the boiling water. And you want everything to settle down before you transfer it to the place where it's going to sit and finish cooling for 12 to 24 hours. Now, if you're doing it in a steam canner, you don't want to take the top off. That's what your instructions will say. But when you finish the time, then you will leave the lid on for at least 5 minutes, and then you can take it off, and then you can move the jars. And wherever you move them to, you want to move them to a place where they're sitting on a towel, or they're sitting on a rack or a cutting board or something. If you put it on a cold counter, you might again have a broken jar, which nobody wants. Anyway, let them sit there for a day so that everything gets to settle, the seal gets to be good and strong, and you don't have to worry about it. Okay. And these are pasted into the chat at the top, and so you can copy them from there. And these are all good places to look for recipes that you can do with cranberries. And all of these sources are also sources for recipes that are safe. Anything you get from the National Center for Home Food Preservation is something you don't have to worry about. And are recipes that we can use for our teaching. And I think, and then these numbers are also numbers where you can get help or find other information. So I think that's it.
Linda?
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about removing the rings and washing anything off that might draw in?
Yes, that's a good point. So after you have finished processing and they have had their 24 hours of sitting there undisturbed, it's recommended that you store them without the rings. And that's because little bits of water can get inside those rings and can start a rust process. And you also don't know if somehow or the other, maybe a little bit of whatever the product was got outside and got stuck in there. And so if you remove the rings and take a damp cloth and wipe off the outside before you store it, you save yourself the possible grief of finding out you had a leaky jar or missed something. Those are things you don't want to find when you go to the shelf to get out your nice cranberry chutney that you want to use on your Christmas ham and find out that the jar wasn't any good. So did we have any questions from anybody?
We had a question about why we need about 2 inches of water over our jars in a water bath.
That's because when you are boiling, when water is boiling, the surface of the water is not level. It goes up and down. And so if your water was only clearing the top of the jar by a little bit, it would be possible for the top of the jar to be naked, not have water over the top of it at some point in time. And anytime you do that, you are not really at the same temperature as you would be if you had boiling water all around the jar. So having a good layer over the top is something that you want to have. So that pan that you use, if you're using one of your regular kitchen pans, measure before you start. Make sure that you have room for the rack in the bottom, whatever size jar you're using, and room for the water to boil over the top. And anybody who's ever done it, if you fill a pan all the way up to the top and then bring it to a boil, you're going to be cleaning very hot water off of your stove and floor. Okay. Oh, the pineapple dried fruit. I have found it, since I found it at more than one place, I think I can mention the places. I have found it at Safeway in the dried fruit section. I found it at Podesto's in Stockton, and I also have found it at Walmart. So those are the places I know I have found it. And it may not say glacé or anything, but what happens when you dry pineapple is it becomes very sweet because all the sugar is concentrated in a much smaller, and it's pretty sweet to start off with. So, and when you're using the dried pineapple, remember it's not going to dissolve like the ginger is. So you really want to make sure you chop up those pieces so that they're not too big. You want a fine dice on it, because otherwise it will make a very chunky spread rather than a smooth spread, because the cranberries, even though they look pretty bumpy, once they cook, they smush. So you don't have to smush them ahead of time. Okay. Well, stay tuned to our website, that you will, in our Facebook page and stuff. That way you'll see what we have coming up. And like I said, I know for sure that January will still be Zoom. And at that point in time, we should probably be able to tell you how we're going to do the rest of them. At least I hope we will be able to tell you how we're going to do the rest of them. So I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. Barbara and Colleen, did I forget anything?
No, I don't think so. I hope they try this before the holidays and add it to their table, Thanksgiving or Christmas. It's really is nice.
One of the things I thank you for that, because one of the things that I know about a lot of pickles, and chutney is technically a pickle, is generally over time the flavors mellow together more, and so what it tastes like right straight out of the pan may be a little sharper than it will be after it's sat and blended for a little bit. So if this is something that you wanted to make, you could certainly make and use it right away, because I have done that too. But if you wanted to use it at Christmas or give it away as a Christmas present, I would after you have finished with your Thanksgiving dinner, then, and I will take this opportunity. I always feel the onus of the master food preserver. So this is one of my things is, after you have spent 4 days getting ready for Thanksgiving, and you have gotten up early in the morning and you have done all the things to cook that turkey and to get everything out. And I love the presentation. I know there are people who do the cooking ahead of time and everything, but I want to put that turkey on the table when I'm doing it. So you've done all of this and you've sat and you've had a dinner and everybody has looked like Norman Rockwell and they're all stuffed. And all you would really like to do at that moment in time is go fall on your bed or fall in your chair and watch a football game or some TV show. But no, the time limit is 2 hours. And so from the time you took it out of the oven and it started cooling down and it sat on the table while everybody ate dinner, now is the time where you get up and you take it off that platter and at least condense it as much as you can and get all that stuff put in under refrigeration, because you don't want to leave it sitting out on the table for 4 or 5 hours, because you are now giving food pathogens a opportunity to grow in their favorite environment, and you don't want to do that. So I will just caution you all, save some reserve of energy. Have a big cup of coffee with your pie, whatever it takes, but get out there and get that turkey off the table and get it in the fridge. And that goes for the stuffing and the mashed potatoes and anything else that needs to be refrigerated. So that's the master food preserver, food safety person talking to you, because you don't want to experience what happens if you don't. Anyway, I think we're good. So unless anybody has anything further, I think it's time to say goodbye. And Colleen and Barbara, after I've closed the meeting, let's log back on for a sec.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I see no more questions.
Okay. So everybody have a great Thanksgiving. I hope you have a great Christmas season. Enjoy and remember all the things that we have to be grateful for in this country. Bye-bye.
Bye.